software development life cycle is a framework that defines the steps involved in the development of software at each phase. It covers the detailed plan for building, deploying, and maintaining the software. SDLC defines the complete cycle of development, such as all the tasks involved in planning, creating, testing, and deploying a software product. It is a process that defines the various stages involved in the development of software for delivering a high-quality product. SDLC stages cover the complete life cycle of a software, for example, from the inception to retirement of the product. The purpose of SDLC is to deliver a high-quality product which is as per the customer's requirement. SDLC has defined its phases as requirement gathering, designing, coding, testing, and maintenance. As you can see on my presentation, this is the diagrammatic representation of the SDLC cycle. First, it evolved to requirement gathering data and analysis. Then second, design and goes through implementation or coding. Then testing. Then deployment, and last, the maintenance. The first phases of SDLC is requirement gathering and analysis. During this phase, all the relevant information is collected from the customer to develop a product as per their expectation. Any ambiguities must be resolved in this phase only. For the second phase, it is called design. In this phase, the requirement gathered in the SRS document is used as input and software architecture that it is used for implementing system development is derived. The third is the implementation or coding. Implementation or coding starts once the developer gets the design document. The software design is translated into source code. All the components of the software are implemented in this phase. The next is the testing. Testing starts once the coding is complete and the modules are released for testing. In this phase, the developed software is tested thoroughly and any defects found are assigned to developers to get them fixed. Regression testing is done until the point at which the software is as per the customer's expectation. Testers refers SRS document to make sure that the software is as per the customer's standard. The next phase of SDLC is the deployment. Once the product is tested, it is deployed in the production environment or first UAT, or what we call user acceptance testing. It is done depending on the customer expectation. In the case of UAT, a replica of production environment is created and the customer along with the developers does the testing. If the customer finds the application as expected, then sign-off is provided by the customer to go live. The last is the maintenance. After the deployment of the product on the production environment, maintenance of the product, for example, if any issue comes up and needs to be fixed or any enhancement is to be done, is taken care by the developers. To further understand more this topic, here are the SDLC models. When we say SDLC model or software development lifecycle models, it is a descriptive representation of the software development cycle. SDLC models might have a different approach, but the basic phases and activity remain the same for all the models. The first model is the waterfall model. Waterfall model is the very first model that is used in SDLC. It is also known as the linear sequential model. As you can see on my presentation, this is the sequence pattern of waterfall model. In this model, the outcome of one phase is the input for the next phase. Development of the next phase starts only when the previous phase is complete. First, requirement gathering and analysis is done. Once the requirement is freezed, then only the system design can start. Herein, the SRS document created is the output for the requirement phase, and it acts as an input for the system design. In system design, software architecture and design, documents which act as an input for the next phase are created, such as implementation and coding. In the implementation phase, coding is done and the software developed is the input for the next phase. For example, the testing. In the testing phase, the developed code is tested thoroughly to detect the defects in the software. Defects are logged into the defect tracking tool and are retested once fixed. Bug logging, retest, regression testing goes on until the time the software is in go-live state. In the development phase, the developed code is moved into production after the sign-off is given by the customer. Any issues in the production environment are resolved by the developers, which come under maintenance. This model has also advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of this model is the simple model, which can be easily understood and is the one in which all the phases are done step by step. Deliverables of each phase are well defined, and this leads to no complexity and makes the project easily manageable. But the disadvantages of this model, waterfall model is time-consuming and cannot be used in the short duration projects. As in this model, a new phase cannot be started until the ongoing phase is completed. Waterfall model cannot be used for the products which have uncertain requirement or wherein the requirement keeps on changing, as this model expects the requirement to be clear in the requirement gathering and analysis phase itself, and any change in the later stages would lead to costs higher, as the changes would be required in all the phases. The second SDLC model is V model. It is also known as the verification and validation model. In this model, verification and validation goes hand in hand. For example, the development and testing goes parallel. V model and waterfall model are the same, except that the test planning and testing start at an early stage in V model. You can see on my presentation the V-shaped pattern for this kind of model. It has two phases, the verification phase and the validation phase. Under the verification phase, it has requirement analysis. In this phase, all the required information is gathered and analyzed. Verification activities include reviewing the requirements. Down to the system design. Once the requirement is clear, a system design such as architecture, components of the product are created and documented in a design document. Next is the high-level design. High-level design defines the architecture or design of modules. It defines the functionality between the two modules. Then goes to the low-level design. Low-level design defines the architecture or design of an individual components. Then go to the coding. Code development is done in this phase. Whereas, on the other phase, the validation phase, it has the unit testing. Unit testing is performed using the unit test cases are designed and is done in a low-level design phase. Unit testing is performed by the developer itself. It is performed in individual components which lead to early defect detection. Second is integration testing. Integration testing is performed using integration test cases in high-level design phase. Integration testing is testing that is done in integrated modules. It is performed by the testers. Down to the system testing. System testing is performed in the system design phase. In this phase, the complete system is tested such as the entire system functionality is tested. Next is the acceptance testing. Acceptance testing is associated with the requirement analysis phase and is done in the customer's environment. The model is easy to understand, but it has also advantages and disadvantages. For the advantages, it is a simple and easily understandable model. The model approach is good for smaller products wherein the requirement is defined and it freezes in the early stage. It is a systematic and disciplined model which results in a high-quality product. But the disadvantages of this model is it is not good for ongoing projects. Requirement change at the later stage would cost too high. For the next model for SDLC is the prototype model. The prototype model is a model in which the prototype is developed prior to the actual software. Prototype models have limited functional capabilities and inefficient performance when compared to the actual software. Dummy functions are used to create prototypes. This is a valuable mechanism for understanding the customer's needs. Software prototypes are built prior to the actual software to get valuable feedback from the customer. Feedbacks are implemented and the prototype is again reviewed by the customer for any change. This process goes on until the model is accepted by the customer. Once the requirement gathering is done, the quick design is created and the prototype, which is presented to the customer for evaluation, is built. Customer feedback and the refined requirement is used to modify the prototype and is again presented to the customer for evaluation. Once the customer approves the prototype, it is used as a requirement for building the actual software. The actual software is built using the waterfall model approach. In this model, it has also the advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of prototype model is reduce the cost and time of development as the defects are found much earlier. Missing feature or functionality or a change in requirement can be identified in the evaluation phase and can be implemented in the refined prototype. Involvement of the customer from the initial stage reduces the confusion in the requirement or understanding of any functionality. But the disadvantage of this model, since the customer is involved in every phase, the customer can change the requirement of the end product, which increases the complexity of the scope and may increase the delivery of the product. Next model is the spiral model. The spiral model includes interactive and prototype approach. Take a look on the diagram for this model. Spiral model phases are followed in the interactions. The loops in the model represent the phase of the SDLC process, such as the innermost loop is of requirement gathering and analysis, which follows the planning, risk analysis, development, and evaluation. Next loop is designing, followed by the implementation and then testing. The spiral model divided in 4 phases. The first is planning, then risk analysis, engineering, then the evaluation. The planning phase includes requirement gathering, wherein all the required information is gathered from the customer and is documented. Software requirement specification document is created for the next phase. The second is the risk analysis. In this phase, the best solution is selected for the risk involvement and analysis is done by building the prototype. The risk involved in accessing the data from the remote database can be that the data access rate might be too slow. The risk can be resolved by building a prototype of the data access subsystem. For the engineering, once the risk analysis is done, coding and testing are done. And the final is the evaluation. customer evaluates the developed system and plans for the next iteration. Here are the advantages and disadvantages of the spiral model. Risk analysis is done extensively using the prototype models. Any enhancement or change in the functionality can be done in the next iteration. The disadvantages of the spiral model is the spiral model is best suited for the large projects only. The cost can be high as it might take a large number of iterations, which can lead to high time to reach the final product. For our fifth model is the iterative incremental model. When we say iterative incremental model, the model divides the product into small chunks. For example, features to be developed in the iteration is declined and implemented. Each iteration goes through the phases, namely requirement analysis, designing, coding, and testing. Detailed planning is not required in iterations. Once the iteration is completed, a product is verified and is delivered to the next customer for their evaluation and feedback. Customers' feedback is implemented in the next iteration along with the newly added feature. Hence, the product increments in terms of features, and once the iterations are completed, the final builds hold all the features of the product. Phases of iterative and incremental development model has 4 phases. First, the inception phase, then the elaboration, next the construction, then the last is transition phase. In inception phase, it includes the requirement and scope of the project. Next is the elaboration phase. In the elaboration phase, the working architecture of a product is delivered, which covers the risks identified in the inception phase and also fulfills the non-functional requirements. In the construction phase, the architecture is filled in with the code which is ready to be deployed and is created through analysis, designing, implementation, and testing of the functional requirement. Next is the transition phase. In this phase, the product is deployed in the production environment. It has also advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is any change in the requirement can be easily done and would not cost, as there is a scope of incorporating in the new requirement in the next iteration. Risk is analyzed and identified in the iteration. Defects are detected at an early stage. As the product is divided in smaller chunks, it is easy to manage the product. But the disadvantage of this model, its complete requirement and understanding of a product are required to break down, and the sixth SDLC model is the Big Bang model. When we say Big Bang model, it does not have any defined process. Money and efforts are put together as the input and output come as a developed product, which might be or might not be the same as what the customer needs. Big Bang model does not require much planning and scheduling. The developer does the requirement analysis and coding, and develops the product as per his understanding. This model is used for small projects only. This is no testing team, no formal testing is done, and this could be a cause for the failure of the project. The advantage of this model is it is very simple model. Less planning and scheduling is required. The developer has the flexibility to build the software of their own. The disadvantage of this model is the Big Bang model cannot be used for large, ongoing, and complex projects, high risk and uncertainty. For the last SDLC model is the Agile model. Agile model is a combination of the interactive and incremental model. This model focuses more on flexibility while developing a project rather than on the requirement. Here is the diagram for Agile model. In Agile, a product is broken into small incremental builds. It is not developed as a complete product in one go. Each build increments in terms of features. The next build is built in previous functionality. In agile iterations are termed as sprints. Each sprint lasts for 2 to 4 weeks. At the end of each sprint, the product owner verifies the product, and after his approval, it is delivered to the customer. Customer feedback is taken for improvement, and his suggestions and enhancements are worked on in the next sprint. Testing is done in each sprint to minimize the risk of any failures. The advantage of this model is it allows more flexibility to adapt to the changes. The new feature can be added easily. Customer satisfaction as the feedback and suggestions are taken at every stage. The disadvantage are lack of documentation, agile needs experience, and highly skilled resources. If a customer is not clear about how exactly they want the product to be, then the project would fail. To conclude my presentation, adherence to a suitable life cycle is very important for the successful completion of the project. This, in turn, makes the management easier. I hope you would gain immense knowledge about SDLC, Software Development Life Cycle.